Hi, so today we want to talk about debt. And there's different kinds of debt, but we're talking about our debt from the Congress, okay, which is, I think, $32 trillion. This is the Fed balance sheet debt. As you can see, we hit 9 trillion, now we're 7 trillion. My opinion on this, as long as that remains that high, we have plenty of liquidity in the market. And you can see that the way crypto's trading, and we still have these high flyer stocks, the Mag 7 and so forth. So when the Fed balance sheet expands, it goes directly into our financial assets, stocks, crypto, whatever. This is what goes up because of this debt, okay? But we're not going to talk about that today. This is our global debt. It hit up 7 trillion last year to 318 trillion. And as you can see, we're about 330 times our GDP. So we have lots of debt out there. As for the US, we basically added $11 trillion in debt since 2020. Okay, so we are now have the biggest item on our budget is our interest payments. So why are we talking about this now? I'm talking about it because I'm starting to see data points that maybe, and again, this is all extrapolation, that the countries are coming to a way that they're going to address the debt. And I know a lot of people think that we're just gonna, say we're not gonna pay it or whatever. I don't think that's a feasible way, but there are other ways this could be done. So the whole world's in debt. So we could go through this with a lot of different things, but I'm just gonna point out that China is starting to sell ultra long bonds. Now, again, from an EM, emerging market country, everything's under 10 years, and they're now doing 20, 30, and 50-year bonds. But China has come out and said that they're looking to do 100-year bonds, and they tested the water back in 1996. They issued a 100-year bond until 2096 at 9% interest. Now we have Bessent as our Treasury official. As we all know, we've done many videos on this. He is determined to bring down the long bond. This is what he wants to do. But as they say here, the second paragraph is the most important one. The most intriguing part of Bessent's vision is his openness to issuing ultra long-term treasury bonds, securities with 50 or even 100-year maturity. This isn't just a technical adjustment, it's a statement. Ultra-long bonds send a clear signal about how the Treasury plans to manage its debt in a changing economic environment. Now, the first paragraph here, they state that, Bessent believed that interest rates were heading lower, and this is because they could stick with the short-term debt issuance and refinance later when the rates get cheaper, okay? And which also kind of says that they think the rates are going to stay where they are, they might even rise. So this is an issue. And as we know, we've already done a video on this, Bessent has taken up our issuance of just T-bills to over 40%. And I know people are wondering why our 10-year has come down about 60 basis points. In my personal opinion, it's because we're not issuing any more 10-year bonds at this time, okay? That's the first thing. So they go on to say here that, doing the cuts that we're doing and putting on the tariffs, infrastructure investment could stoke inflationary pressures, complicating the fixed income outlook. Bessent is steadfast in his commitment to preserving the US dollar's role as the reserve currency. Now, this is important because treasuries remain a critical store of value with no real alternative. No matter what anybody tells you about crypto, there's no real alternative to treasuries. But alternatives might be sought if the US policy is seen as engineering negative real interest rates or financial repression. So what's financial repression? It's called QE. And what are our negative real interest rates? So if our inflation rate is, it's not they say it's 2.8, it's 3.4. And if our interest rates go below with inflation, so 3.4 plus 1.5 for a 10-year bond makes it a 4.9% interest rate, where the rates should be. And as you know, we're down around 4.10. So in other words, we have negative real interest rates at this time. Now here's where Bessent gets interesting. He says they're heading off a guaranteed financial crisis. And basically, when you read through this page, he says they're resetting. That's why they're cutting on our budget, and because we're faced with a financial crisis. So the question is how do they see us getting out of this? Now, anybody who follows me, remember we did the video on Giannis and his statements about what he thinks Trump and his team is trying to do. And one of the things he said was that they were going to issue 100-year bonds. And I've been watching that ever since we did that video. And guess what? We are now seeing China, Germany, America actually talking about issuing 100-year bonds. But Giannis had something very interesting in his statement. He said that they would then have a forced conversion. In other words, let's say you're a bond manager, you own bonds, you own the 2-year, the 5-year, maybe even the 10-year. And the government then calls you up and says, guess what? This is now a 100-year bond, and this is what the interest rate is, okay? That is a distinct possibility that this could happen, because you just can't throw your debt out the door. You can't sit there and say, we're not going to pay on it. It doesn't work, okay? So you then have to think through, what could we actually do so that we could reduce our interest payments, which are the number one item on our budget line now, just superseding defense, okay? How do we actually do this? So the thought process is we issue long-term bonds. And the long-term bonds in the past have been done for big infrastructure projects, which makes total sense. And when you consider where we are in the world today, we're leaving the old world, we're transitioning into the new world. This transition costs a lot of money. Go across the world. Macron spending $91 billion on AI. Look at what Germany just did. Germany is spending, it's a 50-50, 50% on defense, 50% on infrastructure. Look at the Japanese spending $60 billion on Rapidus, their chip plant. Look at us, Starlink or whatever it's called, they want $500 billion. So in other words, issuing 100-year bonds for infrastructure products that a country must do to remain competitive, this is the way things are normally done, okay? Now, I come from an era where we had these 100-year bonds. That's where I started, okay? One of the interesting things which no one talks about with the 100-year bonds is a lot of times they're PIK bonds, payment in kind. And you can see here that PIK bonds have been fairly popular in the past, but usually when someone's in trouble. So a country's in trouble, a company's in trouble. So if you're getting 6% interest on your commercial bond, what they say is you get 6% in more bond, right? Payment in kind. You get more bonds. So now you own 106,000 of the bonds versus 100,000 after your 6% interest is paid in more bonds. And here are the people who have issued 100-year bonds recently. Again, I'm not saying that this will be the new trend, but you can see that it is a trend around the world, okay? And notice who it is: Spain, Italy, Ireland, Belgium, Mexico, Argentina, Austria. All these people are not what you would call top tier places that people want to put their money. So they issue 100-year bonds. So what does this all mean to us? Obviously, these governments are thinking through. When you look at China, Japan, United States, we're heavily, heavily in debt. We can't just blow away our debt. It's just not possible, okay? So we have to think of a way, think your way through it. What's the best way for us to, quote unquote, pay our debts and be able to pay our debts? And the answer, according to China and Bessent, are 100-year bonds. What do you think? Tell me in the comments.